Hello and welcome to the third and final module on psychoanalytic literary criticism. In the last module, we looked at some chief Lacanian psychoanalytic principles and concepts and terms, and we understood how the Lacanian distinction between the imaginary and the symbolic might have a bit of it might be compared to the psychoanalytic stages, psychosexual stages of development that were delineated by Sigmund Freud himself. We looked at how a child enters the world of language, the world of symbolic, and how that is in opposition to the world of the imaginary. While the symbolic is represented by order and chaos and rules and associated with the father figure, the imaginary is more of a chaotic entity which has strong resonances with the maternal. Therefore, like we mentioned in the last class, the child now enters what Lacan calls the world of the symbolic. This distinction between the symbolic and the imaginary has been used extensively in literary studies by followers of Lacanian psychoanalysis. So, as we mentioned figures like Sigmund Freud and Carl Gustav Jung and Jacques Lacan, we must now be in a position to understand how they borrow from each other and how they develop each other's ideas and how they also significantly differ from each other. To sum up, like Freudian critics, Lacanian critics also pay close attention to the unconscious motives and feelings. However, instead of excavating for the motives that might be driving the characters or even the author himself, as a Freudian critic would do, a Lacanian critic would in fact search for those of the text itself. They are interested in uncovering contradictory undercurrents of meaning that exist within the text, which lie something like unconscious, which lie like a subconscious beneath the conscious of the text. This is, as you can see, perhaps another way of defining the post-structural process of deconstruction itself. Lacanian critics also see the literary text as a site where the enactment or the demonstration of Lacanian views about language and the unconscious play out. They are particularly interested in the elusiveness of the signified, as we explained in the previous module with the example of the tree, the perpetual illusion of the signified under the signifier. They are also interested in establishing thus the centrality of the unconscious, which in Lacan's own terms is structured like a language. Now, to illustrate some of the concerns of a Lacanian approach to literature, we shall now attempt a psychoanalytic Lacanian reading of a prominent text, just the same way as we attempted a Freudian reading of Shakespeare's Hamlet. The text that we shall now take into consideration for our appreciation and analysis is Lacan's own well-known interpretation of a detective story written by Edgar Allan Poe. The story is called The Purloined Letter. Now, as in the case of Hamlet, I will briefly run you through the basic premise and the plot of the story, and we will then attempt a psychoanalytic Lacanian reading of the very same. Now, there are 5 characters in this story. There is a queen, there is a king, there is a minister who is employed by the king and the queen, there is a chief of police, and there is a character called Dupin who is a detective. These are the 5 primary characters who figure in Edgar Allan Poe's The Purloined Letter. Now, as the story opens, we understand that the minister is in discussion with the queen in her own apartment, and while they are discussing affairs thus, the king enters unexpectedly. Now, the minister quickly notices that the queen is becoming very nervous in the presence of the king, and she is very anxious that the king should not see a letter that is lying in front of her on a desk. Now, she is clearly incapable of concealing the letter, of hiding it, because in doing so she would inevitably draw the king's attention to the letter, the very letter that she does not want the king to see. Now, the minister sees all of this happening, and when the king and the queen are distracted in talk, he swiftly pockets the letter, and he substitutes a fake letter from his own pocket, which has a similar appearance to that of the letter that he stole from the queen's desk. Now, Soon after this, the queen discovers that the letter has been stolen, and she quickly realizes who must be responsible for the theft. She realizes that the minister must have taken the letter. Now, after the minister leaves, she gets the chief of police and his men to search the minister's apartment thoroughly in an attempt to retrieve the letter. However, in spite of employing his best men and in spite of sweeping his room with an extensive and scientific search, they are unable to retrieve the letter, and the queen naturally becomes frustrated. In desperation, the queen asks for Detective Dupin's help in getting back her letter. Now, Dupin visits the minister's apartment and talks to the minister, and realizes that the minister would not really carry the letter with him on person, because it would be too risky. If he were to be apprehended, arrested and searched, that would reveal the letter immediately. So, he must not have the letter on him in person, yet at the same time he must have kept the letter in some place where it would have been extremely easy for him to retrieve, because if he is not able to retrieve the letter itself, the very purpose of having the letter is defeated. Therefore, Dupin correctly deduces that the letter must be in the minister's house, but it must not be very well hidden, because if it had been extremely well hidden, the inspector would have discovered it in the first place. He correctly deduces that the letter must have been hidden in plain sight. Thus, he goes back to the apartment and finds the letter very casually placed among the other letters that the minister has in his apartment. Now, Dupin steals the letter back, substitutes a third fake letter in its place, and the original letter is returned to the queen. Order is restored and the minister's plan is foiled. This is in effect the bit of the story that we are interested in. Thus, if we attempt a psychoanalytic Lacanian reading of this story, we understand that the stolen letter becomes an emblem of the unconscious itself, because in the story we find out nothing about the contents of the letter. We do not know what the letter contains. However, we do see that the effect that the letter is capable of eliciting on the characters in the play. It is capable of evoking a strong emotion from almost all the characters within the story. Likewise, by comparison, the content of the unconscious is by definition unknowable to us, but everything we do is affected by what our unconscious holds. We can all guess at the nature of this content by observing its effects. Just as the same way, we can deduce the general nature of the letter's content by looking at the anxiety that it generates. Similarly, a Lacanian critic would point out that all words are thus like purloined letters. We can never open them and we can never see their contents. However, we do have the signifiers, which are the verbal envelopes or the concepts themselves, so to speak. But these concepts, these envelopes cannot be unsealed. We cannot open them, we cannot get to see their contents, so that the signifieds will always remain hidden. The signifieds will always slide. There is an incessant slide of the signified under the signifier, just like the content of the purloined letter in Edgar Allan Poe's tale. Therefore, we understand that comparing the Freudian and Lacanian examples discussed in this chapter, in this lecture, will make it immediately apparent that even though they stem from the same original body of Freudian theory and Freudian psychoanalysis, there is an immense gap and there is an immense gulf that exists between these two approaches, and that is the very beauty of psychoanalytic criticism. Even though it basically stems from the same key concepts, it differs significantly from Freudian psychoanalysis to the psychoanalysis developed by Carl Gustav Jung, and eventually to those that are continued to this day by Lacan and Kristeva and other such theorists. And that concludes our short discussion and lecture on psychoanalytic literary criticism. Thank you very much. See you next lecture.